My name is Matty Fearon, and I am an alcoholic. Matty. And I am a member of the East Naples Men's Group. We meet on Monday nights. We have a beginners meeting at 6 o'clock, and our home group meeting is at 7:30. I am also a lifetime member emeritus of the Belford Clearview Group, which meets in Middletown, New Jersey, also on a Tuesday night. They're meeting as we speak. So. And again, it's a pleasure to be here. For my own personal satisfaction, if you were here last week and you're here tonight, please raise your hand.
All right.
See, I told Jimmy, they'll come back. Right? It's like a field of dreams. If you build it, they will come, right? So there we go. So, here's alcoholic thinking for you, okay? I'm 36 years sober, but the thought of a drink, or as I said last week, a drunken euphoric recall that we're so good at. When Janet was doing all the names was that, or who was in early sobriety, right? And she said last call. Those were the two words I never ever wanted to hear. I drank in bars all through Manhattan. They were open to 4 a.m. And that was the last thing that you wanted to hear, that it was last call. You know, it's I'm married with four young kids at home, but I had no issues of being in bars, spending my rent money, spending their diaper and food money. You know, I'll get back to that. I'll get back to it. But God forbid I should miss something. Right? It was all about me. You know, in the peak of my alcoholism, you know what my favorite holiday was? Not Christmas, not Easter.
New Year.
That was pretty good. Any other guesses? Think. Daylight savings time. Extra hour. When they turn the clocks back, not the ones ahead. Right? If you were a bartender, I ran a couple clubs in New York, and it was great. You know, at 4 o'clock they would start, and you turn it back, and magically it happened. So. That's alcoholic drinking. That's the drunk's euphoric recall, right? So it's, again, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the world famous 12-step house, which is located where?
Fort Lauderdale, New Jersey.
See, I didn't make no faux pas this week. I didn't say Fort Lauderdale, New Jersey. So, and I did go back to the audio tape to make sure that I did say that. And sure enough, I did. So that was that. So, step 2, 1 year rose. Read to everybody what step 2 is, please.
Came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity.
Lovely. Thank you. I gave you a little history about me, and before I start, I told you guys last week that when I speak, again, I mentioned if you're a New Jersey, New York native, you know, there's no such thing as chips. There's no such thing as medallion tours. You're in one group, one medallion, one everything, boom, and then you spread out. And here it was that, but it gives us the chance to get medallions. Pat Rogan gave me, when I said to him, because we both celebrate in March, I have him by just a touch. And I would say to him, you know, how do you handle all this? You know, when you're getting all the meetings that we go to, when you're getting 5, 6, 7 medallions. And he said to me, Matty, it's very simple. The first one's for you, and the others are for a newcomer to show that this works, right? Most of the other ones I get, I hold, I give away. I have them in a little jewelry box, and I give them away mostly to the guys that I sponsor. And so we did step 1 last week. As I shared with you guys, you know, my first sponsor, Ronnie Schreiber, changed my life. Ronnie and I did, all the sponsors of the 4 I had, Ronnie, I had the least amount of time, was 18 months. But we did the first 9 steps together. And again, as I shared, he was the one that gave me my book. Remember, I went through all that. I'm going to be using this. I use the 12 and 12 and the little red book. And when we sat down to do this, and there really were, as I said last week, there really wasn't meetings back in the day that step work was done or going through the big book. And the group I belonged in West New York, New Jersey, in early sobriety, there was 3 meetings. The home group had 3 meetings, and one of them was a big book meeting. And we would go through, and that's where this came in, and that's when he made me, again, I think this is my 2nd or 3rd edition of me transposing my 30 plus years worth of notes. So we always made a theme for each of the steps that we did. And the first step, this is when he agreed to be my sponsor, and I touched on this a little bit. Remember I told you the thing about the pencil and the pen, right? Oh yes, huh? We were talking about acceptance, the acceptance pamphlet, right? And I just found out somebody was asking about it, so I brought mine. And you can Google this, and you can download it, and you don't have to pay for it. So, that's that. So when we did, when we had step 1, we called it the embarking step. When he agreed to be my sponsor, and we were going on, and that's when the famous, and I say it to all my guys, are you in? Are you in? It was like, when he said that to me, I'm hearing, because it was a love-hate relationship for a long time. Mm-hmm. I loved everything about him, but when he told me to do stuff, sometimes I didn't like that, or my reaction to it, or the resentment that I would get. But he was a lot smarter than I was. When I got this 90-day pen, that night he celebrated 10 years, and that was like, wow, you know. When I first came and heard somebody, because we pick up a 90-day pen, how could anybody stay sober for 3 months? I thought that was impossible, right? So when we started, and we got to step 1, and we called it the embarking step. And he said to me, if you're in, and again, I mentioned Ronnie wasn't a religious man, but he said, you and I are about to embark on a spiritual journey to find the God of your understanding. Not his, not anybody else's, the God of my understanding. And I love that. You know, my 14 years of Catholic education, I already had a pre-diagnosed idea of what and who I always reached out to in every foxhole prayer that we ever had. But that's what he did. And he wrote it in my book, and I still have it there. Then he asked me, for you to succeed in this program, you have to stay centered. You have to stay focused, and you have to stay centered. And here I have it right here now. We were about to embark on a spiritual journey, Ronnie Schreiber, April of 1989. And he said to me, I want you to write what being centered means to you. And here's what I wrote. Being centered, and again, it's a 3, right? It's a 3-fold disease, physical, mental, and spiritual. So I came up with this, because this is what I heard. Alcoholism is a disease that centers in my mind. Recovery is a lifelong journey that centers in my heart. God, the way, the truth, the life, centers in my soul. Amen. See, you come in, speaking for myself, I came in here hopeless and soulless at the end. And that's what happened. But things would change. Things would start to change. And then I got one of those, I heard some young girl say early on, and I wrote it down the night that she said it, alcohol gave me wings and taught me how to fly. Alcoholism stole my soul and took away the sky. Some pretty cool stuff we hear here, you know? Not everything is don't drink and go to meetings. But if you don't follow that advice, then you're done, right? Then you're done. So, as we said, did I do the medallion thing or no?
No.
This medallion, 36, was given to me by my good friend Sheldon. It's awesome. The fellowship, the camaraderie, that's when I got here after being in a men and women home group for over 20 years. I wanted to get into a men's group. So I took the tour. I had known of Ray O'Keefe. Remember I told you guys about that. So I went to North Miami Men's down that way there. I went out to West Side Men's, went there. And someone said, here's the story how this happens. I'm here for a short period of time. I've just met Stevie B. That's a story that I'll get to on the night that happened. I was walking through that door there. I'll save that for when he's here so that I can give him a little zen. So he says to me, I'm doing the step series up in Boca, First United Methodist. I would like for you to come. You're going to meet some guys and you'll be able to do that. So we go to Thomas was there, the Barnyard or whatever the Yard Bark or whatever the name of that restaurant was in Boca. Everybody's having dinner. So I come walking in and I don't know a soul. I don't know anybody here. And I'm walking around and there's 3 empty seats at this one long table. And this Grateful Dead looking long-haired, sort of with a loud mouth, says to me, are you looking for like Stevie B? And it was Vinny T. And I said, yes, I am. And he says, here, you can sit here under one condition. The guy that's coming out of the bathroom, his name is Paul. And when he comes out, tell him that you really like his wig. If you know Paul Baker, that story's been going on. Yeah? Vinny didn't know me from a hole in the wall, right? So as we said last week, you read the room, right? I read him, and I said, Vinny? And he said, yeah. I said, the famous, hey, I was born at night, but not last night. So Paul came in and sat down next to me, and he always mentions the slender threads. And my sponsor in New Jersey was sick and would pass very shortly, and I knew I needed a sponsor. And that shortly thereafter, I asked Paul to be my sponsor. Slender threads. If I don't go to that meeting, who knows what happens? See, those are the things that happen here. That's the power that we talk about. The power that we're going to discuss in step 2. Now, when I got to the East Naples Men's Group, and there's a lot of characters there, and a lot of old timers and some older men, and I fit right in. I really, really liked it. And there was a fellow there by the name of, these guys know him, and Pete and the rest of the guys in our group. His name was George Davis. George passed a year, maybe 2 years ago, 90-something. He came into AA as an elderly man, but still had a lot of time. And George had this saying, and then I would sit with him, and I asked his permission on this. So when we had step 1, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, and our lives had become unmanageable. And then step 2, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity, right? George said this, and I was taken back. He said, the powerlessness in step 1 becomes the power that you need in step 2. And then I said, George, can I add a third line to that? And he said, of course, what is it? I said, he will come and introduce himself to you in step 3, and his name is God. And he said, Matty, that's perfect. And we had that little thing together until he passed. So that's what that'll be on step 3. But in step 2, the first part that I like and I went to is, remember we talked about the Little Red Book. The Little Red Book here was written by a guy, Ed Webster. And it was a companion book to the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. Dr. Bob loved it. He gave his seal of approval on it. Ed started that. We used to call it AA for Dummies. And then it morphed out as the popularity of this grew. I think there was 15 printings of it. But there were guys up in Saskatchewan, Canada, prisoners. And guys were bringing the meeting in. And they spun off and called it Novalco, which stand for Novice Alcoholic. And when I would come to leave New York in my first year of sobriety and found my home group down in New Jersey, the first meeting I went to on a Friday night was called a Navalco step meeting, and I was introduced to this. So on step 2, there's one great line, great paragraph actually, that I normally try to start off with, right? Just give me a sec. Here it is. I'm going to speak a little bit more about it. Who knows what the principle behind step 2 is? Who said that? Stephen, man, back-to-back weeks. Step 1, step 2. Doesn't Stephen clean up well? Look at the progress this board's made. Excellent, excellent. Here's what the little red book says about step 2, beginning, about hope. Step 2 opens a vista of new hope when it's based on willingness and faith. What we call this power is a matter of your choice. Call it what you will. Naming it is unimportant. The important thing is that we believe in it, that we use it. It is used to restore us to mental health and physical fitness. They talk a lot about the physical part of getting well. There's a lot of us coming here physically sick. Italicize this line. Faith in a higher power is the basic law of recovery. It is always evident in the lives of successful members. Look around for people that you know, that you say in your heart and soul, I want what he's got. I want what she's got. I wish I was half the sponsor Janet is. I want what she has. By practicing the 12 steps, we gain a conscious contact with this power, whom I choose to call God. And you get to live in contented sobriety. What a promise, right? What a promise to these drunken Saskatchewan Indians in prison. And a lot of them held on to it, right? A lot of them held on to it. So then, the step 2, for the core of that, I want to get into this. Stephen answered it, hope, our second principle. Clarissa, I will forward you this prayer before I read it.
No, it's mud.
Oh, thank you. Did you hear me talking about you?
Yes, I do.
No, you didn't.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, Stevie B.
Maybe.
In my house, I have what's called that I call a serenity wall. I'll mention it quite often. And it's plaques and sayings and stuff that I've collected over the last 36 years. And this one I got, it's one of the last one because there's no more room left on the wall. Right? Unless Christine knocks a couple off, and then then we're fine. So this is when I'm working with new guys. I bring guys over to my house. We go through the book. We'll go through the big book. We'll go through guys I sponsored. Sheldon was there. 6-8 guys at a time, or any of the new guys. Tim knows now. He sits there. A lot of guys have sat at my little breakfast nook, and we do that. So when they finish their steps, I remind them that you came in here hopeless, and now you have hope. And I read them this. For what it's worth, it's never too late, or in my case, too early, to be whoever you want to be. There's no time limit. Start whenever you want. You can change or stay the same. There were no rules to this thing. This thing, there were no rules, but there are suggestions, right? We can make the best or the worst of it. Think about that, right? I hope you, when I'm telling my new guys, right? I hope you make the best of it. I hope you see things that startle you. I hope you feel things you've never felt before. I hope you meet people who have a different point of view. I hope you live a life you're proud of. And if you're not, I hope you have the courage to start over. If you relapse, you've lost your hope, start over. I don't want to say we beg you, but as close as we can to get to that, please don't drink.
Amen.
Look around like we talked about last week. But again, the odds are stacked against you. We were talking last week. Remember I said 7 out of 10 probably don't get a year sobriety. But it's better than what it used to be. Like I said, we'll take 30, 35%. So this, when Ronnie and I started, and then we came into that, and we called it step 2. And he called it, and I wrote this all down 36 years ago. He called it the 3-word step, right? Step 2, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves can restore us to sanity. The 3 words are the first 3. Came, first word, right? All you guys came through that door or through this door, right? It's the hardest thing about working out is coming through the door of the gym, right? The hardest thing for a lot of us is walking through that front door. But you came. You came too. My spiritual advisor, Patty B., who I mentioned last week, who gave me that quote that I closed with last week, he would say, came to you because you were in a mucus state. Love the word, mucus, right? Your brain is in a fog. You don't know what's left or right, but you're not drinking. And it's starting to clear up. The cobwebs are starting to clear up. And then you came to believe. Things start to change. Early sobriety, things start to change. The people you're associating with, they're encouraging you, and your life's starting to get better. Things are starting to change. You came to believe. And for us, it had to believe that that power is going to change your life. And again, he will introduce himself to you in step 3 as God. You have to be in harmony with that power, right? That powerlessness that's there. The most important part. This is I think it's the greatest chapter ever written. It's called We Agnostics. And in my book here, and I'm going to give credit to an unmentioned source. For years, I had written down agnostic, AG Latin for against, Gnostic for knowledge. So when I spouted that 30-something-year-old term that I kept using over and over and over again, someone lovingly pointed out to me that I was incorrect. Can you imagine? I was incorrect. Agnostic the ag part is for without. And the Gnostic is, as you can know, knowledge. I was without knowledge. When I got here, I was without knowledge. I was without knowledge about God. I knew him. 14 years of that will do it. 2 grandmothers that went to church every day, that'll do it. But the believe part. Did I believe? Yeah, I believed. But did I believe? I believe in God, or do you believe God? Russell. One of the greatest things that he says a lot of good things, but that was key. Do you believe God? There's a difference. Think about it. There's a big difference. When you're new, we ask you 2 questions, right? Here's the 2 questions, and if you answer yes to 1 or 2, gold stars are not given out, but you're welcome. So on page 44, it'll say, if when you honestly want to, you find out you cannot quit entirely. How many have sat back after a horrible run and said, man, what did I do? What did I want to do? If you answered yes to that question, you got 1 foot in. And then the second one is, or if when drinking, you have little control over the amount you take, you're probably an alcoholic. Right? 2 simple questions. But I avoided every answer that ever could have been on that. Any answer of that at all. When we come in, and here's step 1 and 2, and if we don't practice them the way they're designed for us to do, remember we talked last week, it's a 2-part thing. We talked about Bill and Bob. We talked about Ebby and Bill, right? We talked about the hyphen, the equal sign of the 2. And we talked about accepting and admitting. Remember, I said, I can admit to anything. Under the gun, I'll admit to anything. I may lie to you right to your face, not too much anymore. But accepting was the thing, the two parts there. So then it tells us here, if I don't admit and accept that part, and especially the part in step 2, if I'm believing now that there's now hope for me to do that, here's what will happen if I don't. I'll be doomed to an alcoholic death. Or, here's the choice, if you start getting step 1 and 2, I can live on a spiritual basis and face the alternatives. And a lot of those alternatives are very hard to face. I always knew the difference between right and wrong. That was given to me, from my mom and my dad. And if a mere code of morals or a better philosophy of life were sufficient to overcome alcoholism, many of us would have recovered long ago. Right? If I could understand that, if I could have understood it then, I could have. I'll give you just a couple things about my family and things that are important to us. My dad, he was a big man, Irishman, big dude. And he was what I would come to know as a periodic. I never knew what that was. He didn't drink all the time. But when he drank, and I borrowed a line from AA, when he drank, he made our lives unmanageable. He was the pure Jekyll and Hyde that our book talks about. He would come in after working 70 hours, 80 hours a week. He was a stagehand in New York City. He would come in, big paycheck. My mother was happy, everything was there. Naturally, he had been at the bar. And he would come in either in the greatest of mood, and we would all jump up because you knew he was reaching into his kick, and everybody would get a taste. All right? That was the dad we loved. Or he would come in, something bad had happened, and he'd lined you up, and it's how I learned how to fight. I had 3 brothers, and that's what would happen. And I love my dad. To the day he died, I love him. I had a friend of mine who was in the program working in the theaters with me, and his dad would call, his dad was in the program, his name was Harry Jaffe, and every time he would call the theater and we'd be working together, he would say to his dad, all right, Dad, I'll see you, I love you. I could never do that. I wanted to, but I never could get the words out. That Irish Catholic guilt, I don't know what it was. And then one day I did it, and it caught off. My father's now retired, living down here in Florida. He passed in 97. And I said it to him, and it became our thing, just him and me. I'm the oldest of 6, and it was something special. The night before he died on a Sunday in his bed watching football. And that Saturday night, I used to call quite often, and that was the last thing that I said to him. I love you, Dad. If I don't hear Harry Jaffe say that, a guy in the program, that doesn't happen. These are the hundreds of miracles that you're going to experience in this program if you choose to stay. And in this, our step 2, when we talk about that powerless that will start to believe, you can handle, once you're over that line, you can handle anything. It's the sanity part I always had an issue with. Right? Restore me to sanity. So what is that telling me? That somewhere along my line in my alcoholic life, I was insane. And then, when you sit back and do your inventory and you start looking back, of course, every one of us had insane behavior to all different degrees. But that insanity that they talk about in step 2, when you get to your 9th step promises in there, it'll restore you to sanity. God will restore you to sanity if you follow these few simple suggestions. But I did insane things under the influence of alcohol. And as I shared with you guys last week, I knew it. I picked up my first drink at 14. Remember I told you the night the men landed on the moon? Big CYO dance. And I made a fool of myself, but I became a legend that night. at 14. And my last drink was at 34. So for 20 years, I lived that lifestyle, and the insanity was there. And to give you one quick example, as we do these 12 weeks, I'm going to share with you happiness, which is fleeting. We talked about that, but joy, which lasts eternal. And I'll share with you tragedy. And I'll try to how you get through things without picking up a drink. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it doesn't. I'm living with 3 barmaids on 45th Street and 12th Avenue in New York, and it is, for lack of a better word, a ghetto. But it was cheap. And there were 4 bars there, and that's what sealed the deal. And I'm working at, if you've ever been in New York, in the middle of Times Square, there's a discount ticket booth called TKTS. And you buy, at that time it was half-price tickets, and that's where I was working. And I'm off on Mondays, and I was out on a Sunday night, all morning, and I'm woken up by my uncle, who was a Port Authority policeman, and the super, who I never see, and he's shaking me and waking me up. And I'm like, Jack, what's going on? He says, you need to call home. That's not good, right? There's no cell phones. What happened? Call your mother. Not call your father, call your mother, right? Most alcoholic men that I know, we tolerate our father, but man, we love our mother. And I call her, and she says, you have to come home. I said, what happened? She said, last night your brother Mark was in a horrific car accident, and he died. September of 1982. And she goes, I need you home. I said, Mom, I'll be right there. I'll be right there. I live an hour plus away. What bus are you going to get? I said, I'll call you when I get to the Port Authority. Insane. Hopeless, broken, guilt-ridden. Here's the power of alcoholism, right? I pack my little bag. I call work. I'm going to need a couple days. Go. You're covered. You're covered. I go to the Port Authority. I'm walking in. I catch the bus. I call my sisters, pick me up on the highway at 6 o'clock at night, whatever the time was. And I walk into the bus, and the voice came. The voice. Off to my right was a place I frequented, of the 20 or 30 deli stops I would make along the week, right? Never wanted to be in the same place all the time. Might miss something over there. And, God, Timmy something, whoever was the bartender. And I sat down and I told him the story. Naturally, grief, and everybody felt bad for me, right? Buy him a drink. The last bus out of New York to go to Jersey, where my mom and dad lived, was at 12:30, and that's the one that I got. My sisters waited for me on the highway forever. See, the insane, insatiable desire for me to drink outweighed the responsibility that was waiting for me at home. That's the power of alcoholism. So I get home, it's late, I'm drunk, go to sleep. There was room for me on the couch. There's 100 people in my house, naturally. So the next day after the Mass, the repast is at our house and stuff like that. And I'm, as my sisters always call me, my sisters call me since I was young, Hollywood. Hollywood, do this, do that. So I walk into the room where all my aunts are. And I have an Aunt Irene who never married, whatever they used to call them, spinsters or whatever it was. She didn't like me. Everybody loved me because I was charming and manipulative, and I had the alcoholic charm, and I can do that, right? As I'm doing now, right? And she didn't like me, and I couldn't imagine why. And I come to find out that I reminded her so dearly of her brother-in-law, who was my grandfather, Frank Kelly, who I never met. See, Frank was a house painter in Union City, New Jersey, and Frank was very charming. And what had happened, he never cheated on my grandmother. My mom was one of 8, but Frank liked to flirt, and he liked to party, and he liked to entertain. When Dion talks about his dad being like a gypsy, that's the impression I got of my grandfather. Everybody loved him. And I heard, well, what happened? Whatever, he died, he fell off a ladder while he was at work. I would later come to find out when I'm doing my 9th step with my mom and dad that my grandfather was an alcoholic. And how he died was he fell off a ladder, drunk, and died. You know, and that would be, wow. I start to put all the things together. So as I'm standing in this room where my aunts are, and I see Aunt Irene, like, give me that look, and oh man. So I turn and I walk out. Then I wanted to say something, so I turned around and came back in. And then she goes to say to my Nana Kelly, my grandmother, she goes, I always knew this was going to happen to Margie. That was my mom. I always knew this was going to happen. And my grandmother says, what are you talking about? That one of these wild sons that she has, this was what was going to happen. I just never thought it was going to be Mark. What I heard was the wrong son died. And I took that, wow, 1989, 1982, and I still get that. I took that and ran with it. But I made a promise to my mom, and I said, you know, I won't, Mom, I'm here for you. I'm not going to drink. And for 18 months, ladies and gentlemen, I didn't drink. I smoked some weed, I did some other stuff, but I didn't drink. And you know what would happen when you're an alcoholic and you don't drink? All of a sudden, promotions are coming. I'm rising up. I'm not spending hundreds of dollars in the bar on a week. And that was the change. I could see that there. That guilt and stuff that was there would change me. Because I didn't want to ever have to feel that way again. But sadly, I wouldn't stay sober. You know, one Super Bowl Sunday, I would do that. And I'm married now with a couple young kids. And so here's how I'm going to close. Step 2, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. My insane thinking in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous started to get better. And it happens this one way, because you have to change. Remember I was sharing last week that my first guy I met in one of our big home groups in Jersey City, Pasquale COD. He had like 40 years when I met him, and unbelievable. I had like 6 months. And he would be COD, and I was like, what is cash on delivery? You know, what is this going on? When did he try to give me a check before for an appearance fee? And I said, no, I'm not doing that. So he said, for you, here I want you to say, because this is what I tell all you shining superstar 90-day wonders. COD, change or die. Boom. Change or die. So if you don't change, you may die. So here's this closing for step 2. I hope I don't mess it up. Guys would tell me, if you want what you never had, no, if you do what you always did, you'll get what you always got. If you want what you never had, do what you've never done. Thank you.
All right.